Hello, folks, and welcome back to American Songster Radio. This is Season 4, Episode 4, on the soul, roots, and future of black country music. And I'm here with my co-host, Vania Kinard, and we're going to talk a little bit about black country and what it means to us.
Hey, everyone. Well, I'm so excited to be talking about black country music and Traveling Wildfire, black cowboys, and everything in between. And the first thing I want to mention to you, Dom, is when I first met you, you were the first person to really bring up country music in the context of the black experience. And, one of the questions I have for you is, what was your first awareness of black country music, and where did your inspiration come from to move in this direction for the new album?
Well, it's interesting because my first introduction to country music came from my dad. So my African-American father, he grew up in the town Flagstaff, Arizona, which is sort of a smaller town in Arizona. And when he was growing up, they had just one radio station in town. So he learned a lot of country music songs. So even when he was coming up, when he came down to Phoenix, he was kind of an outlier because he had this sort of Western look that was different than everybody else. And he also knew all the country music songs. And so that was my introduction. My dad was the first person to tell me about the ways that country singers sang compared to soul singers. Soul singers sing with this sort of high range with a lot of glissando and a lot of trills, while a lot of times standard country music singers kind of sing with a lower voice and a lower timbre. And he would just tell me stuff about that all the time. So it gave me my first introduction to country. And then as I went along, I started to listen to more country music like Hank Williams and Lefty Frizzell, and that grew into its own sort of love of Bob Wills, Jimmy Rogers, Ray Price, and even more contemporary songwriters, like Willie Nelson or Merle Travis, and going forward. So there were a lot of different people I was listening to. So that was my introduction, was my dad.
Well, it's so funny that you bring up your dad, because the first time I met your parents, I actually met your dad first. And it was honestly one of the best experiences, because your dad came down the stairs and he was wearing these yellow ostrich cowboy boots and a gigantic bolo tie. And he totally looked like a black cowboy. And he was like, "Hey, I'm Dom's dad." I was like, whoa, okay. So your dad definitely had the country western black cowboy vibe going on from the moment I met him. So it sort of comes around full circle with your album Black Cowboys, and that being a huge part of your background and your heritage.
Absolutely. And I'll even just mention that those marigold ostrich toe boots made their way over to the Country Music Foundation when they had me for their American Currents exhibit a few years back. I was able to have those boots on display, which brought it all full circle for me. But yeah, with the country music, though, once you start to think about country music as a broad spectrum that includes songs that are hit songs, no matter who does them or what, you start to find that there's a wide range of artists who have covered country music material, and they've adapted it and turned it into their own thing. And so that's something that I wanted to do on this episode, was to kind of showcase some of the really beautiful ways that these country music songs have been changed. I'll definitely point to the Hank Williams examples that I have, which was James Brown, where, of course, James Brown does his signature scream at the end of the "You're Cheating Heart." And that's something that's very different from country music. But to hear it, it's recognizably "You're Cheating Heart." And then, of course, you have "You Win Again" from Fats Domino, which is another one that kind of sort of takes a different approach.
Yeah, well, we're going to break down some of the songs and the artists that you've curated for this playlist. But I really want to go back a little bit to your Southwestern roots, and then also talk about the black experience in country music, because it's not limited to just the artists who you've chosen for this playlist, but there's a large group of Black people all throughout the country, whether you're in Arizona or California, where I'm from, or in the deep South, that are huge fans of country music. And I think it's important to acknowledge that they're out there, and it's a very important part of Black culture.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where for many years it was something that there was a circumventing of how Black people could interact with country music, because it has been a genre that is so considered a white type of music that I had many years where I would meet Black people who were fans of country music, but they were sort of afraid to go to the places that were only said to be all white spaces. Of course, nowadays I feel like that there are a lot more doors opening up. I think people are also more conscious to be more inviting to people coming into the country music scene. But when I first started, I just came in with the history and the knowledge that I had gained from being a fan of country music, and then I was able to evolve and be able to project new sounds into that country music that I love so much.
Nice. And, it's so funny because when I think back on the time where I first met you, you had so many records and you were just like always collecting music, always having like tons of CDs around. And the first album that you ever gave me was Papa Celestine, so that's more jazz.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, oh, and then you should check out Jimmy Rogers. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep an open mind. I'm going to listen to both of these albums on CD at the time. And yeah, I was really into both of them, but particularly Jimmy Rogers. I grew to really love his sound, and for some reason I just developed this like very deep connection to him as a person and his music. And maybe it's because, my family's from Mississippi, so that's where my roots come from. Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, Virginia. And once I start listening to country music and in all of its different avenues, I just became totally hooked. And you really brought up the conversation of Black country music to me before I even conceived of it as a thought. And I was like, oh yeah, Black cowboys, Black country music, that totally makes sense to me.
Absolutely. And when you start to think about, the idea of Black cowboys, that's why I did Lonesome Old River Blues on the album, was that I wanted to showcase that you could have both of these styles of music interlocked together. And you could then make your own type of country and Western music. And then, of course, with the two wonderful gentlemen I had with me on Lonesome Old River Blues, Brian Farrow and Dante Pope, I was able to craft a sound that was something akin to like a music like doo-wop, but it would be more sort of a soul-based country music. So that was something that I wanted to have on that recording. And so, when you think about just the history of songs and publishing, that's when you start to find the biggest variety of Black country music and soul country specifically, because a lot of the soul country artists, they were not trying to sound like traditional country and Western music. They were trying to sound like Black pop music that was contemporary to their time. Every once in a while you would have someone do a divergence more into a very country honky-tonk style, but more times than not you have just a full-on soul rendition of a country music song. I'm sure that's due to the fact that Ray Charles had his album Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music come out, and it sort of set a wave that allowed different artists that were in the soul field to just kind of have at it on some of them. Like one song that I was really close to putting on here was a great version of Tennessee Waltz, the old standard, sung by Ruth Brown, the pioneering rock and roll singer. But you can't have everything on every episode, so that'll have to be next time when we do a Soul Country episode 2.
Well, there's so many artists to choose from, and you picked a couple of new ones. Like, for example, you have Peg Leg Sam on here with the Navajo Trail, and then also Crying in the Chapel by the Orioles, which when you played me that song, I was like, this is awesome. Yes, this definitely is country music.
Well, it's even interesting with that one. I rarely hear anybody reference the original version of Crying in the Chapel, more so than the Orioles, which again, I became familiar with that recording of Crying in the Chapel on a set called the Doo-Wop Box, where it's more of a part of the doo-wop, magical golden legacy of that style of music. And yeah, the Orioles are always a wonderful group. I mean, such drama and such bravado that comes through on that one. And even when you hear the story of Crying in the Chapel, I mean, Artie Glenn, he was a guy who suffered a horrible back injury. And as the story goes, he prayed to God, and God gave him the will to get up from that bed. And so then he wanted to write a song about it. And so he wrote the song Crying in the Chapel. He had a lot of trouble finding someone to publish the song. But then finally, once it did get published, funny enough, it was his own son recorded the first version. By the end of 1953, the year that he began publishing the song, it was recorded by 4 different acts, including the Orioles. But the Orioles just do such a great version. I wanted to have that on there, and then match it next to something like how Fats Domino does "You Win Again."
Yeah, well, there's a lot of variety. And, for the sake of our own time restraints, we couldn't add everything. But the one thing that I definitely want to mention is that Black country music spans a lot of different generations, right? So you have string band music, you have soul music, you have the Charlie Pride era of music, and then you have everything that's basically happening now, from Kane Brown to Jimmy Allen to Mickey Guyton to you, being a huge, important player in the country music space as well. So the whole entire episode is themed around the concept of the soul, the roots, and the future of Black country music. And let's start off with the soul. Where is the soul? Is the soul of Black country music living in Nashville? Is its beginnings in the South, like in Mississippi, or is the soul everywhere?
I mean, in some ways nowadays the soul is everywhere because everyone can get to a microphone and show it. For how we did it in the episode, I wanted to showcase how in the later part of the '60s, that's when you have really big divergences going out into a wider sound of soul country, and that's one of the things that I wanted to bring out the Dirty Laundry album and bring out those 2 tracks of He Called Me Baby by Ella Washington and Just Because You Can't Be Mine by Betty Swan. And those 2 women just interpret these lyrics in such an awesome way. Now, it's something that folks at home will have to now listen to the Harlan Howard version of He Called Me or She Called Me Baby, and then also Merle Haggard's version of Just Because You Can't Be Mine. And you'll see that there's just a lot of extra soul, a lot of extra feeling and emotion have been brought into these newer versions that were coming out contemporary to the original versions.
Well, that's what I think is so interesting about sort of like where Black country music has been and what the future looks like. And the one thing I've noticed is that, especially in the past, you have a lot of Black artists who aren't necessarily country musicians recording songs that were written by someone like Willie Nelson or Hank Williams. But now I can see that like the future of Black country music really leans heavy on original songs written by Black people for Black people. But the one thing that I have noticed, though, just from my own observations, is that there aren't a lot of Black artists or Black songwriters sampling or covering other Black country music songwriters. They do a lot of collaboration, so let's not, I don't want to like say too much about it. There's a lot of collaborations. So you see a lot of Black artists collaborating with each other and doing country music songs. But I don't necessarily see a huge groundswell of Black country artists recording other Black songwriters' songs, if that makes sense.
Sure, and then that's one of the things that's deep within the history of country music. So you have to imagine that working on at Music Row in Nashville, a lot of the soul country artists that we're talking about, they either heard the songs on the radio, which is where a lot of people, a lot of Black country artists start, is that they heard it on the radio, a place that's not relegated to color just because of the nature of how radio comes out of a speaker. So a lot of them were big fans of the Grand Ole Opry and just had loved that sound. And so we've talked about that on previous episodes with with Bobby Rush. He mentioned even that he loves country and western music from knowing the Grand Ole Opry. So that's one part of it. And I think in some ways the radio is still a big advocate and a messenger for country music for contemporary Black artists. But it's also we just don't live in a world that's built on covers like they were way back in the 60s. You know, it still wasn't as common for an artist to be the full-on songwriter for all of their material like it is today. Most songwriters are the artist as well. So you have a singer-songwriter that is presenting their music. And so it's just not the same type of culture. A lot of these artists in the 60s, they'd come into a session, and then they would have probably a producer who would bring the material, and then they would say, oh, here, try this material, this song or that song, and they would figure out how to do it in the studio, which is very different than how you're mentioning that there's not really a Black cover of Black artists, because there aren't many Black country artists that have been in the forefront. So it's still something that is such a new idea that I would wonder if that could be a culture that could grow out of more of the Black country artists that we're seeing that are obviously wonderful and are out there in the world.
Absolutely. Well, that's something I guess to look forward to in the future. You know, seeing a lot more Black songwriters creating hit songs in the country music space for other Black artists. And not just limiting themselves to Black artists, but Black songwriters writing hits for someone as big as Chris Stapleton or Luke Combs. I think that definitely needs to be something that, you know, as musicians, as songwriters, we can all look forward to.
Yeah, I think that's something that can happen one day. But for now, all we can do is just play the hits and play the records that showcase that power. And that's why I wanted to put together this particular set of music for everybody, showing a little bit of the deep roots of country music with the Fox Chase by D. Ford Bailey and the Cannonball by Leslie Riddle, and then pulling right into the soul country vein and just bringing all these different interpretations that are very different than the original artist into the forefront, so that people can understand and hear the soul of country music that's behind the lyrics. I mean, that's one of the things too. People just don't know that there is a soul in country music if you pull it out of it. And so that's what these artists have done.
Well, for the new album, Traveling Wildfire, I really feel like you pulled out the soul of country music in many ways, but you also talk about the next generation of Black life in America too. So it'd be great to just talk a little bit more about If You Truly Love Me, which is the song we chose for this episode. And then how does that song lean into traditional country music, and how does it also talk about the Black experience?
Well, with If You Truly Love Me, it's a song that's about love lost. It's a story of a guy trying to finally make amends and cut ties with his previous lover. And he meets her right in the front of her house, and she's looking out the window pane. And in some ways, it's something that I found could touch deep to the heart of anybody who's been in that position, where also money's involved. That's something that I knew would be something that would that would relate to a lot of people who have dealt with that situation, looking at a locked door. So I thought that there was that part of it. And then also, in trying to create a new sound for my record, I wanted to reach back into the older sounds of country music. And so I have Matt Penn playing a wonderful pedal steel on that one. And then I'm doing the sort of the bass drum as well as the guitar on there. So the bass drum's doing a nice waltz rhythm that kind of lets the song move along. And then I have that harmonica to get that full sound of like the Mickey Raphael sound that he gets with Willie Nelson's band. And yeah, that was what I wanted to do with If You Truly Love Me. And I wanted people to really get deep into that groove.
Yeah, well, I feel like the theme of Black love is also something that within the Black community, it's such a powerful thing to not only talk about, but you see it all over TV shows, you see it in movies, you see Black love being represented in all sorts of ways and being celebrated. So the idea that you incorporated Black love and also sort of the juxtaposition of love lost as well, I think that was a really smart way to incorporate Black experiences that are very modern, but also making it universal so that it can relate to anybody who's had an experience, like you said, where they had a lover who they went back to see and they said, hey, like, do you really love me? And if you do, like, let me go free, like, let me live my life. And I think those are very powerful moments that can happen in anybody's life.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. And it's one of those things where when you start to look at country music as a whole, it's always about telling a story. And that was what I wanted to do with this song, was to tell a story, and to tell a story that could really relate to people as they're coming out of the pandemic, as they're starting to look for that new foundation. And then, of course, I've heard a lot of these conversations going on. Mickey Guyton and I talked about this in our interview last season on American Songster Radio. We talked about, opening the door for people, helping people get forward, also giving people inspiration by just appearing in person so that they can see that there are others that can be interested in the music, and that there are other people that are now around, so that we're all here. We're all here for each other, and we're all here to build community. So hopefully one day we will have that hit record by the Black songwriters and with a Black country and Western artist singing it. I think that would be a wonderful thing to see in the next few years, but that's just going to have to wait until we have more hit songs in the can.
Absolutely. Well, if you could go back in time and collaborate with any country music artist, who would be the number one collaboration?
I mean, DeFord Bailey, without a doubt.
Would you back him up on banjo?
I would try.
Or would you do double harmonicas with DeFord?
Oh, that'd be awesome to do double harmonicas with DeFord. That would be out of this world. I mean, that'd be the first person I would choose.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember we went over to his historical marker over in, is it Carthage, Tennessee?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, and we took our daughter Cheyenne Love over there, and it was really beautiful. She got a chance to see DeFord's historical marker, and we told her a little bit about it. And then Dom played a little bit of the fox chase, and honestly, she's been loving the harmonica a lot, and she actually played a little bit of her version of the fox chase right next to DeFord Bailey's marker. So that was a really beautiful experience for someone as young as Cheyenne, our daughter, who's only 5, to hear DeFord and be able to be inspired to pick up the harmonica and try to play in the way that he played, mimicking you and mimicking him. It was just really beautiful to see that.
Yeah, well, she can grow up without a stigma against country music saying that she can't be a part of it, and that's something that's really important to remember, is that only until recently there was a stigma that people of color weren't even a part of country music. And so as that stigma starts to lessen and starts to fade away, we'll find that there will be more people who are fully embracing country music, and they can say that I love country music, I love being a part of it. And then as they start to contribute into the genre, then they can say that they are contributing to the genre and that there's a history that is there.
Definitely. Well, I have to say, hands down, we've met so many different people within the country music community, from executives to people working on the publicity team, songwriters, artists, people, who are just within the deepest parts of the country music community in Nashville and in other places. And honestly, I love hanging out with folks who are part of the country music scene.
Oh, we have a good time.
Oh my gosh, I love it. We have the best conversations. Some of my favorite moments of all time are actually backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, meeting the different artists there. They're just so kind, so welcoming. Actually, I had a very positive experience with, we were hanging out backstage with Cheyenne, and you were getting ready to go on stage, and the Opry announcer, Eddie Stubbs, he walks up and he's like, "Welcome to the country music family." I'm like, yes, This is so great. I just love it. So, we personally, both of us, can only say amazing things about being within the country music spaces.
Absolutely. And that's why doing American Songster Radio on WSM has always been such a pleasure. And just to be able to be on the airwaves and play some of this music for you and then share our experiences, that's part of what makes it all worthwhile. So I hope that folks will find some inspiration in this episode and find a little bit of some funkiness that they can take with them to be able to bob their head, and also just take some time to read up on some of these early country music artists and see how it's been a tough road for some of the folks, especially you look up James Brown and his first appearances on the Grand Ole Opry. That is something that I would recommend to everyone so that you can understand where we've come from and also how far we've come since those early days. Mm-hmm. And so...
Well, speaking of the Grand Ole Opry, before we end the show, I don't want to go too long about it, but you've played on the Grand Ole Opry many times.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Opry experience? And then I'll tell you mine.
Oh, okay. Well, my favorite Opry experience was the very first time I made my debut as a solo artist. Of course, I had been there with the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and there were a lot of wonderful moments that we had as a group. But when I first got to play a harmonica solo on the Grand Ole Opry, it was really, really a treat just to be able to stand on that stage just all alone with just me and my harmonica, and to be able to move those people so much and give them a little flavor of the past and of the pioneering sound of someone like D. Ford Bailey. That made all the world for me.
Nice. Well, I've got two of my favorite moments at the Opry. The first one was after you had just played, I believe it was the first time you debuted, I got invited on stage.
Oh, yeah, they pulled you out for the spotlight.
They pulled me out to the circle, folks. I got so excited. And they're like, and this is Dom's beautiful wife, Vania, and their newborn baby, Cheyenne Love. And the entire crowd went nuts. Mm-hmm. And so that was a really beautiful experience. And then the other one was actually with Carrie Underwood. She had just performed on stage, did an incredible job, and we were standing in the wings, and I was holding Cheyenne, and she was like maybe 5 months old, so she was so tiny, and Dom was right next to me, and then all of a sudden, I just see a whole crowd swarm around Carrie Underwood, and they were trying to take pictures and say hi, and she literally was like, "All right, everyone," moving people out of the way. She's like, "I gotta go see that baby." The best part of it was that Carrie Underwood took a moment to say hi to me and Cheyenne. And it was really beautiful just to see her acknowledge us and to say hi. And even we got a chance to see her a few other times. And I mentioned to her, just thanking her for all the music that she did and being a wonderful representative for all the new moms out there who also have to work in the music industry and take care of their young children too. So it was a really great experience, and I just felt so much love coming from the Grand Ole Opry. So glad to be here on WSM as well and making history with you all.
Wonderful. Well, I think with that leaves us with the end of our podcast. And so again, folks, make sure you check out all the original artists and some of the stories that built this episode on the soul, the roots, and the future of black country music. And once again, my name's Dom Flemons. I'm your host. And then I've had, as always, with me my co-host, Vania Kinard, my wonderful wife. And we'll catch you next time around, folks, on American Songster Radio.
Thanks for joining us.